You can gently drift to sleep to this calm and soothing narration of the Carl Jung's entire philosophy, and you can subscribe too for more such videos and comment below from which part of the planet you're tuned in. With this, let's begin. Carl Jung's profound exploration of the human psyche carved a distinct path from his mentor, Sigmund Freud, venturing far beyond the personal realm into a universal, ancestral landscape of the mind. His work, often termed analytical psychology, sought to understand the entirety of the human experience, not just its pathologies, but its potential for wholeness and self-realization. At the core of Jung's philosophy lies the concept of the psyche as an integrated, yet multi-layered system. Unlike Freud's primarily libido-driven model, Jung viewed the psyche as a complex tapestry of conscious and unconscious elements, driven by a fundamental urge towards individuation, a process of becoming a fully integrated and unique self. He posited that the psyche comprises several key structures, beginning with the conscious mind, which he identified with the ego. The ego, for Jung, is the center of consciousness, responsible for our sense of identity, continuity, and direction in the waking world. It is what we know of ourselves, our thoughts, feelings, and memories that are readily accessible. It mediates between the conscious and unconscious, striving for coherence and adaptation to the external world. However, the ego is merely the tip of the iceberg, a small island in the vast ocean of the unconscious. Beneath the ego lies the personal unconscious, a repository of an individual's unique forgotten or repressed experiences, memories, and impulses. These are contents that were once conscious but have been forgotten, ignored, or actively pushed out of awareness because they were deemed too painful, unacceptable, or irrelevant. This personal unconscious is the birthplace of what Jung termed complexes. A complex is an emotionally charged group of ideas or images clustered around a common theme, often originating from a traumatic experience or a significant life event. These complexes, though unconscious, exert a powerful influence on our conscious thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, manifesting as patterns, obsessions, or even neuroses. For example, a mother complex might describe a collection of emotionally loaded ideas and memories associated with one's mother, influencing relationships and self-perception long into adulthood. These complexes are not necessarily negative. They can also be sources of creative energy and personal meaning, but they typically operate outside of our conscious control. Jung believed that recognizing and integrating these complexes into conscious awareness was a crucial step towards psychological health and self-understanding. The exploration of the personal unconscious through methods like dream analysis and active imagination was central to his therapeutic approach. By bringing these shadow elements to light, individuals could reclaim projected aspects of themselves and lessen the complex's disruptive power. Yet, even beyond the personal unconscious, Jung theorized a deeper, more profound layer, a transpersonal dimension shared by all humanity, transcending individual experience and culture. This was perhaps his most revolutionary and widely discussed contribution, the collective unconscious. This universal reservoir of primal patterns and images forms the very structure of the human mind, influencing our perceptions, emotions, and behaviors in ways we rarely consciously acknowledge. It is not inherited memories, but rather inherited possibilities of mental functioning, a shared psychic inheritance that connects us all. The collective unconscious is populated by what Jung called archetypes. These primordial images are universal, archaic patterns and symbols that derive from the collective experiences of humanity throughout evolutionary history. They are not specific images or ideas themselves, but rather predispositions to form certain types of images or ideas, like channels through which psychic energy flows. These archetypes manifest in dreams, myths, fairy tales, religious symbols, and cultural rituals across all civilizations, demonstrating their universal nature and enduring influence on the human spirit. They provide the basic framework for understanding the world and ourselves. Among the myriad archetypes Jung identified, several stand out for their pervasive influence and crucial role in the process of individuation. The persona is one such archetype, representing the mask we wear in public, the social role we adopt to conform to societal expectations and present a particular image to the world. It is the compromise between our authentic self and the demands of society. While necessary for social functioning An overly developed or rigid persona can lead to a disconnection from one's true self, creating a sense of inauthenticity or emptiness. It is important to be aware of the persona and not to identify too strongly with it, lest we lose touch with the deeper aspects of our being. The shadow archetype is arguably one of the most significant and often misunderstood. It embodies the repressed, undeveloped, or unacknowledged aspects of the self, both positive and negative. It contains all that we deem unacceptable, shameful, or inferior in ourselves, as well as unexpressed talents and potential. The shadow is not inherently evil. Rather, it is the dark side of our personality that we hide from ourselves and others. When unacknowledged, the shadow is often projected onto others, leading to prejudice, conflict, and misunderstanding. Integrating the shadow by bringing its contents into conscious awareness and accepting them as part of ourselves is a crucial and often challenging step in personal growth. This process of confronting one's shadow is not about becoming evil, but about becoming whole, by acknowledging and owning all aspects of one's being. Then there are the anima and animus, archetypes representing the contralateral gender qualities within the psyche. The anima is the feminine principle within a man, embodying his unconscious feminine qualities such as intuition, emotionality, and relatedness. Conversely, the animus is the masculine principle within a woman, representing her unconscious masculine qualities such as logic, aggression, and assertiveness. These archetypes play a vital role in our relationships, influencing our perceptions of and attractions to others. When these inner figures are unconscious, they can lead to projections onto real people, creating unrealistic expectations or conflicts. Integrating the anima and animus involves recognizing and developing these contralateral gender qualities within oneself, leading to a more balanced and complete personality. For a man, developing his anima means becoming more sensitive and relational, while for a woman, developing her animus means becoming more assertive and rational. The ultimate goal of Jungian psychology is the realization of the self, the central and unifying archetype of the collective unconscious. The self represents the totality of the psyche, the complete and integrated individual, encompassing both conscious and unconscious aspects. It is the archetype of wholeness, the innate drive towards individuation. The self is often symbolized by mandalas, circles, and other symbols of totality and spiritual unity. It is the regulating center of the psyche, guiding the individual towards their unique path of development and meaning. The journey towards the self is not a linear progression, but a complex, lifelong process of individuation, a continuous dialogue between the conscious ego and the unconscious. This process involves a series of confrontations with the various archetypes and complexes, bringing them into conscious awareness and integrating them into a coherent whole. Individuation is not about becoming perfect or escaping suffering. Rather, it is about becoming who one truly is, living authentically and finding meaning in one's existence. It is a process of reconciling opposites, of embracing paradox, and of discovering one's unique purpose. The conscious ego, while essential for navigating the external world, must learn to surrender its absolute control and enter into a collaborative relationship with the unconscious, allowing the deeper wisdom of the self to emerge and guide. This dialogue between the ego and the self is critical for psychological maturity. The process of individuation, the central tenet of Jung's analytical psychology, is a lifelong journey of psychological growth, aiming at the integration of all aspects of the psyche into a unified whole. It is not an egocentric process of becoming unique in a superficial sense, but rather a profound spiritual and psychological transformation into becoming who one truly is, in accordance with one's innate potential and the guiding wisdom of the self. This journey involves a continuous confrontation with and an integration of the various components of the unconscious, the personal complexes, the shadow, the anima animus, and other archetypal patterns. It is a process of expanding consciousness, making the unconscious conscious, and thereby enlarging the field of the ego's understanding. However, individuation is not synonymous with ego inflation. Quite the opposite. It requires a humility of the ego, a willingness to recognize its limitations, and to enter into a dialogue with the deeper wisdom of the self. The ego must learn to yield its absolute sovereignty and recognize itself as merely one center within the larger totality of the psyche, the self. This shift in perspective is often accompanied by a profound reorientation of one's life, values, and priorities. Central to the practical application of Jung's philosophy is the interpretation of dreams. For Jung, dreams are not merely random neural firings or disguised wish fulfillments, as Freud suggested. Instead, they are direct communications from the unconscious, offering symbolic messages, guidance, and compensation to the conscious mind. Dreams act as a balancing mechanism, highlighting aspects of the psyche that are being neglected or overemphasized in waking life. They can reveal unintegrated complexes, provide insights into archetypal patterns, and point towards the path of individuation. Jung emphasized the symbolic nature of dreams, arguing that their language is universal yet also highly personal. He advocated for a method of dream analysis that focuses on amplification, exploring the personal associations of the dream images, but also drawing on collective symbols, myths, and cultural parallels to uncover their deeper meaning. The goal is not to solve the dream as a puzzle, but to understand its message and integrate its wisdom into conscious life. Active imagination is another powerful technique developed by Jung to facilitate the dialogue between the conscious and unconscious. Unlike passive reverie, active imagination is a conscious, focused engagement with unconscious contents, allowing images, figures, and narratives to emerge from the unconscious and unfold. The individual actively enters into a dialogue with these inner figures, engaging with them as if they were real entities. This can involve writing, drawing, sculpting, or simply holding an inner conversation. The purpose is to give voice to the unconscious, allowing it to express itself directly and thereby gain a deeper understanding of its contents. Through active imagination, individuals can confront their complexes, interact with archetypal figures like the shadow or the anima animus, and receive guidance from the self. It requires a willingness to suspend disbelief and engage with the inner world with an attitude of curiosity and respect. By giving form to the previously formless contents of the unconscious, active imagination helps to integrate them into consciousness, reducing their autonomous power and fostering psychological wholeness. Jung also placed significant emphasis on the role of religion and spirituality in human life. He viewed religious symbols and rituals not merely as cultural artifacts, but as profound expressions of archetypal patterns emanating from the collective unconscious. For Jung, humanity has an innate religious function, a drive towards meaning, transcendence, and connection with something larger than the individual ego. He saw the traditional forms of religion as providing a framework for individuals to engage with these archetypal forces and to find psychological and spiritual nourishment. While not endorsing any particular dogma, Jung recognized the psychological efficacy of religious belief in providing a sense of purpose, community, and a means of coping with existential questions. He believed that the decline of traditional religious frameworks in modern society often led to a rise in neuroses, as individuals lost touch with these vital archetypal connections and their inherent need for meaning. The search for meaning, therefore, is an integral part of the individuation process. Synchronicity is one of Jung's most fascinating and controversial concepts, describing meaningful coincidences, events that are causally unrelated but meaningfully connected. It refers to the simultaneous occurrence of a certain psychic state with one or more external events which appear as meaningful parallels to the momentary subjective state. For example, thinking intensely about a friend you haven't seen in years, and then immediately receiving a call from them. Jung argued that synchronicity suggests a causal connecting principle, a deeper interconnectedness in the universe that transcends linear cause and effect. It hints at a pervasive underlying order, a unity of psyche and matter, where inner and outer events can mirror each other in a meaningful way. Synchronistic experiences often have a numinous quality, imparting a profound sense of meaning and confirming one's direction or decision. They can serve as guideposts on the path of individuation, suggesting that one is aligned with a deeper stream of life. Jung saw synchronicity as further evidence of the collective unconscious and its archetypal structures, influencing not just the inner world, but also manifesting in the external reality. Jung's concept of psychological types, introduced in his seminal 1921 work, Psychological Types, provides a framework for understanding individual differences in how people perceive the world and process information. This typology is not meant to rigidly categorize individuals, but rather to offer a heuristic for understanding characteristic patterns of behavior and attitude. At its core, Jung identified two fundamental attitudes, introversion and extroversion. The extrovert's energy flows outwards. They are oriented towards the external world of objects, people, and activities. They are typically sociable, action-oriented, and draw energy from external stimulation. The introvert's energy flows inwards. They are oriented towards their inner world of thoughts, feelings, and reflections. They are typically reflective, private, and draw energy from internal processes. It's crucial to understand that neither attitude is superior, and most individuals exhibit aspects of both, though one tends to be dominant. These attitudes are then combined with four fundamental psychological functions, which describe how people gather information and make decisions. These functions are divided into two pairs of opposing rational functions and two pairs of opposing irrational functions. The rational functions are thinking and feeling. Thinking is a logical, objective, and analytical function, seeking truth and understanding through intellectual discrimination. Individuals who prioritize thinking tend to make decisions based on logical analysis and objective criteria. Feeling, on the other hand, is a value-oriented, subjective function, assessing the worth and significance of things, people, and situations. Individuals who prioritize feeling tend to make decisions based on personal values, harmony, and impact on relationships. Jung noted that feeling, in this context, is not mere emotion, but a rational process of evaluation. The irrational functions are sensation and intuition. Sensation is a concrete, realistic function focused on perceiving the world through the five senses, on what is immediately present and factual. Individuals who prioritize sensation are typically practical, grounded, and attend to details. Intuition is a perception of possibilities, meanings, and relationships that are not immediately apparent, often involving a hunch or an unconscious grasp of complex patterns. Individuals who prioritize intuition are often imaginative, future-oriented, and focus on the overall context rather than specific details. Jung proposed that each individual develops a dominant function, which is the most conscious and differentiated. Opposing this dominant function is an inferior function, which remains largely unconscious, primitive, and undeveloped. For example, if thinking is dominant, feeling would be inferior. The goal of psychological development, particularly in the second half of life, is to integrate these inferior functions, bringing them into consciousness and thereby achieving greater psychological balance and wholeness. The combination of an attitude, introversion, or extroversion with a dominant function, thinking, feeling, sensation, or intuition, yields 8 distinct psychological types. For instance, an extroverted thinking type would be objective, logical, and oriented towards solving external problems, while an introverted feeling type would be deeply concerned with inner values and harmony, often expressing these subtly. Jung's typology emphasizes that a truly individuated person strives to develop all four functions to some degree, even if one remains dominant. This allows for a more comprehensive and adaptive way of engaging with the world, drawing on different modes of perception and judgment as needed. The awareness of one's psychological type and the types of others can lead to greater self-understanding, improved communication, and a reduction in interpersonal conflict, as it fosters appreciation for different ways of experiencing and interacting with reality. It helps individuals understand their natural strengths and weaknesses and identify areas for personal growth on their journey toward wholeness. Jung's later work increasingly focused on the dynamics of the second half of life, proposing a crucial shift in psychological orientation as individuals mature. While the first half of life is largely characterized by ego development, adaptation to the external world, and establishing a secure identity, the second half of life typically brings a deeper introspection and a reevaluation of values. This period often initiates a move away from external achievements and societal expectations towards an internal search for meaning, purpose, and spiritual fulfillment. The process of individuation, though lifelong, gains particular urgency and depth in this phase, as the ego begins to question its long-held assumptions and the focus shifts from collective adaptation to personal authenticity. The crisis of the second half of life, often manifesting as a midlife crisis, is seen not as a pathology, but as a natural and necessary developmental stage. It represents a confrontation with the limitations of the ego and an invitation to engage with the deeper, often neglected aspects of the unconscious. During this time, the inferior functions, which have largely remained unconscious and undeveloped, tend to assert themselves more strongly. For example, a highly logical and objective individual dominant bias. Thinking might find themselves unexpectedly drawn to art, spirituality, or intense emotional experiences, inferior feeling or intuition. This can be disorienting and uncomfortable, but it is also an opportunity for greater balance and psychological enrichment. The confrontation with the shadow becomes particularly poignant in the second half of life. Having established a persona and achieved a certain level of societal success, individuals may find themselves increasingly aware of the unlived life, the parts of themselves that were suppressed or denied. This can involve recognizing unfulfilled desires, artistic talents, or darker impulses that have been projected onto others. Integrating the shadow in this phase means accepting these disowned parts as one's own, not to act them out recklessly, but to bring them into conscious awareness and thereby reclaim lost energy and potential. It requires a radical honesty with oneself and a willingness to transcend the dualistic thinking of good and bad. Furthermore, the archetypes of the anima and animus, representing the inner contrasexual partners, also demand greater integration during this period. For a man, this might involve becoming more attuned to his emotional life, developing his capacity for empathy, and fostering deeper, more authentic relationships. For a woman, it might involve asserting her intellectual and professional capabilities, clarifying her boundaries, and embracing her inner strength. The conscious dialogue with these inner figures leads to a more balanced personality, transcending rigid gender roles and allowing for a richer expression of one's full human potential. The self, as the ultimate archetype of wholeness, becomes an increasingly central guiding principle in the second half of life. The focus shifts from the ego's pursuit of external goals to a more profound alignment with the self's overarching purpose for the individual. This often involves a deeper engagement with spirituality, a search for transcendent meaning, and an acceptance of one's mortality. Dreams in this phase often take on a more archetypal and symbolic character, offering powerful guidance and insights into the individuation process. Synchronistic events may also occur more frequently, serving as confirmations of one's path and revealing the meaningful interconnectedness of inner and outer reality. Jung argued that a failure to engage with the demands of the second half of life, to confront the unconscious, integrate neglected aspects of the psyche, and find deeper meaning, can lead to stagnation, depression, or neurosis. He believed that many psychological ailments in later life stem from a refusal to embark on this inner journey, preferring instead to cling to the ego's achievements and external distractions. Conversely, those who embrace the challenges of this period can experience a profound spiritual awakening, a deepening of wisdom, and a greater sense of peace and wholeness. The individuation process, therefore, culminates not in a static state of perfection, but in a dynamic and continuous unfolding of the self, where the individual becomes more fully themselves, aligned with their unique destiny, and connected to the broader human experience. This culminates in a rich understanding of life as a continuous journey of self-discovery and transformation. Jung's extensive research into mythology, religion, alchemy, and folklore provided compelling evidence for the existence of the collective unconscious and its archetypes. He observed recurrent patterns, symbols, and narratives across diverse cultures and historical periods that could not be explained by direct transmission or independent invention. These universal motifs, such as the hero's journey, the wise old man, the great mother, the trickster, and the shadow figure, appear in ancient myths, indigenous rituals, religious texts, and even contemporary storytelling. For Jung, this striking cross-cultural consistency pointed to a shared innate psychic structure, a primordial scaffolding of the human mind. Mythology, in particular, was seen as a vital expression of the collective unconscious, offering narratives that articulate universal human experiences, anxieties, and aspirations. Myths are not simply quaint stories from the past. They are living psychological documents that provide blueprints for understanding the human condition. They offer guidance on navigating life's challenges, confronting inner demons, and understanding one's place in the cosmos. By studying myths, individuals can gain insights into their own archetypal patterns and find resonance with the broader human drama, thereby alleviating feelings of isolation and providing a sense of deeper meaning. Similarly, Jung delved deeply into the esoteric traditions of alchemy, not as a literal pursuit of turning base metals into gold, but as a symbolic representation of the individuation process. He viewed alchemical operations, processes like heating, dissolving, separating, and recombining, as metaphorical stages of psychological transformation. The base metal represented the undifferentiated, unintegrated psyche, while the philosopher's stone or gold symbolized the individuated self, a state of psychological wholeness and purity. The various alchemical figures and symbols, such as the conjunction union of opposites, the prima materia primal matter, and the homunculus little human, were interpreted as archetypal images of psychic processes. Jung believed that the alchemists, often unconsciously, were engaged in a profound psychological experiment, projecting their inner transformations onto material substances. Their elaborate texts, full of obscure symbolism, provided a rich source for understanding the archetypal dynamics of the psyche's journey towards integration. By deciphering these alchemical metaphors, Jung found a corroboration of his theories about the reconciliation of opposites and the emergence of the unified self. Religion for Jung was a fundamental human phenomenon, inextricably linked to the collective unconscious. He viewed religious doctrines, rites, and symbols as culturally specific manifestations of universal archetypes that address humanity's innate need for meaning, connection, and transcendence. The image of God, for example, regardless of its specific cultural form, was seen as an archetype of the self, representing the totality and unifying principle of the psyche. Religious experiences, visions, and conversions were understood as powerful encounters with the archetypal realm, providing individuals with a direct experience of the numinous. Jung argued that a healthy relationship with these archetypal forces, often mediated through religious or spiritual practices, was essential for psychological well-being. He was less concerned with the literal truth of religious dogma and more with its psychological efficacy, its ability to provide solace, guidance, and a framework for meaning. The loss of connection to these collective symbols, he believed, could lead to existential angst and neuroses in modern society. His work suggested that whether one adheres to a traditional religion or not, the human psyche naturally seeks to engage with these archetypal dimensions, often through other means like art, psychotherapy, or nature experiences. Therefore, Jung's profound interdisciplinary approach, drawing from the vast repository of human culture, served not just as an intellectual exercise, but as a foundational pillar for his understanding of the universal structures and dynamic processes within the human psyche, solidifying the empirical basis for the collective unconscious and the archetypes. A significant aspect of Jung's therapeutic approach, analytical psychology, distinguishes itself from Freudian psychoanalysis by its emphasis on future potential and the client's innate capacity for self-healing, rather than solely focusing on past traumas. While acknowledging the impact of past experiences, Jung believed that human beings are driven not just by causality, the past, but also by teleology, purpose, future goals. This teleological perspective views psychological symptoms not merely as signs of illness, but as attempts by the psyche to communicate a message to push the individual towards greater wholeness and individuation. A neurosis, for example, might be seen as the psyche's way of indicating that the conscious attitude is too one-sided or that important aspects of the unconscious are being neglected. The therapist's role in Jungian analysis is not to act as an all-knowing expert providing definitive answers, but rather as a guide, a companion on the client's journey of self-discovery. This collaborative relationship, sometimes referred to as a dialectical process, emphasizes mutual respect and a careful attention to the client's unique inner world. The analyst helps the client to understand the language of their unconscious, to interpret dreams, engage in active imagination, and confront their complexes and archetypal patterns. The goal is to strengthen the ego's capacity to integrate unconscious contents, leading to a more comprehensive and balanced personality. Countertransference, the analyst's unconscious emotional reactions to the client, was also acknowledged by Jung as an important tool in the therapeutic process, providing valuable information about the client's dynamics. Jung recognized that the analytic relationship itself could become a crucible for transformation, mirroring the client's inner dynamics and offering an opportunity for correction and growth. Furthermore, Jung emphasized the importance of spirituality and the search for meaning in therapy. He believed that many psychological disturbances in modern individuals stemmed from a loss of connection to meaning and a neglect of their spiritual dimension. Therefore, analytical psychology often delves into questions of purpose, values, and the individual's relationship to the collective unconscious and its archetypal expressions. This can involve exploring religious symbols, mythical narratives, and personal experiences of transcendence, even if the client does not identify with a traditional religion. The therapeutic process is deeply personal and unfolds over time, typically involving several stages. Initially, there is often a phase of confession, where the client articulates their problems and experiences, bringing conscious material to the fore. This is followed by a phase of elucidation, where the analyst helps the client to understand the underlying dynamics of their issues, particularly the influence of personal complexes. The third phase, education, involves the client consciously working with these insights, adapting to their newfound understanding, and integrating previously unconscious material into their daily life. Finally, the transformative phase marks a deeper engagement with the collective unconscious and the process of individuation. This involves encountering archetypal images, reconciling opposites, and aligning with the guiding wisdom of the self. It is a process of expanding consciousness beyond the personal ego to embrace a larger, more comprehensive sense of self. The duration and intensity of these phases vary greatly from individual to individual. Unlike some therapeutic approaches that aim for symptom reduction alone, Jungian analysis seeks a fundamental transformation of the personality, leading to a more authentic, meaningful, and individuated life. It is not about simply fixing problems, but about fostering psychological growth and enabling the individual to become the fullest expression of who they are meant to be. The ultimate aim is to equip the individual with the tools for continued self-exploration and individuation long after formal therapy has concluded, fostering a lifelong commitment to psychological integrity and meaning. Jung's ideas have had a profound and far-reaching impact across various disciplines beyond psychology, influencing art, literature, anthropology, religious studies, and even business and leadership. His concept of archetypes, in particular, has become a widely adopted framework for analyzing narratives and understanding universal human themes. In literature and film, the hero's journey archetype, famously elaborated by Joseph Campbell building on Jungian principles, provides a powerful structure for countless stories across cultures and time periods. Writers often consciously or unconsciously draw on archetypal figures like the wise old mentor, the fierce warrior, the tempting seductress animus projections, or the menacing shadow to create resonant and universally understood characters and plots. Understanding these archetypal patterns helps to explain why certain stories resonate so deeply with audiences, tapping into a shared human psyche. The study of symbolism in art and architecture has also been greatly enriched by Jungian insights. Art for Jung was a direct expression of the unconscious, often revealing archetypal contents that are not yet accessible to the conscious mind. Artists, functioning as conduits for the collective unconscious, can produce images that speak to universal human experiences, creating a bridge between the personal and the transpersonal. The recurrence of certain symbols, such as circles, crosses, serpents, or mandalas, across diverse artistic traditions finds a compelling explanation in Jung's theory of archetypes. In anthropology and religious studies, Jung's work offered a new lens through which to interpret myths, rituals, and belief systems. Scholars could move beyond purely sociological or functional explanations to explore the psychological dimensions of religious experience, recognizing how archetypal patterns manifest in sacred narratives and practices. The concept of the collective unconscious helped to explain the striking similarities in religious symbols and mystical experiences across different cultures, suggesting a universal foundation for spiritual longing and expression. This approach allows for a deeper appreciation of the psychological wisdom embedded in ancient traditions. Even in the realm of modern business and leadership, Jungian concepts find practical application. Understanding psychological types, introversion, extroversion, thinking, feeling, sensation, intuition can improve team dynamics, communication, and leadership styles by fostering appreciation for diverse working preferences. Recognizing the influence of the persona can help leaders develop authentic presence, while acknowledging the shadow can lead to greater self-awareness and ethical decision-making. Concepts like individuation and the search for meaning are increasingly recognized as crucial for employee engagement and organizational culture, moving beyond purely financial incentives to address the deeper human need for purpose. Jung's focus on symbols and meaning has also found a place in branding and marketing, where companies strive to create archetypal brand identities that resonate deeply with consumer desires and aspirations. A brand might embody the hero archetype, promising transformation and mastery, or the caregiver archetype, offering nurture and support. Furthermore, Jung's emphasis on the importance of the unconscious has paved the way for a more holistic understanding of human experience in many therapeutic modalities, even those not strictly Jungian. The idea that symptoms hold meaning, that dreams offer guidance, and that personal growth involves integrating suppressed aspects of the self has become broadly accepted. His contributions encouraged a move beyond reductionist views of mental health, advocating for a deeper engagement with the client's subjective experience and their innate drive towards wholeness. Thus, Jung's rich philosophical tapestry continues to provide invaluable tools and perspectives for understanding the complexities of the human psyche and its manifestations in the world, demonstrating the enduring relevance of his profound insights. His legacy lies not just in a school of therapy, but in a comprehensive framework for exploring the depths of human consciousness and culture. Despite its widespread influence, Jung's work has also faced significant criticism, particularly concerning its scientific rigor and empirical verifiability. One of the most common critiques centers on the concept of the collective unconscious and archetypes. Critics from a scientific or empirical psychology background argue that these concepts are inherently metaphysical, unmeasurable, and therefore unfalsifiable. How can one scientifically prove the existence of an inherited psychic structure populated by universal images? They contend that cultural similarities could be explained by diffusion, shared human experiences, or common brain structures rather than a deep, inherited unconscious layer. The lack of concrete empirical evidence for the collective unconscious, in the same way one might test a neurological hypothesis, remains a point of contention. Another area of critique pertains to Jung's methodology, particularly his reliance on subjective interpretation of dreams, myths, and clinical material. While Jung himself acknowledged the subjective nature of his work, critics argue that his interpretations can be arbitrary, open to confirmation bias, and lack a standardized system for analysis. The amplifying approach, where personal dream symbols are connected to universal mythical motifs, is sometimes seen as imposing a pre-existing framework onto the material, rather than deriving meaning solely from the individual's experience. This can lead to interpretations that are compelling but difficult to validate independently. Furthermore, Jung's use of concepts drawn from alchemy, astrology, and various mystical traditions has led some to label his work as esoteric or even cultic, distancing it from mainstream scientific psychology. While Jung saw these traditions as symbolic expressions of psychological processes, critics argue that incorporating such non-empirical systems into a psychological theory undermines its credibility and objectivity. They question the leap from symbolic interpretation to asserting universal psychological structures based on these sources. Jung's writing style itself has also been a source of difficulty. His dense, complex, and often poetic language, rich in metaphor and philosophical allusions, can be challenging to understand and interpret consistently. This ambiguity, while allowing for broad application, also makes it harder to distill precise, testable hypotheses. Some critics also point to what they perceive as a lack of specific therapeutic techniques or a clear, replicable treatment manual within analytical psychology, contrasting it with more structured cognitive behavioral approaches. The emphasis on the unique journey of individuation, while valuable, can make it difficult to standardize and evaluate therapeutic outcomes in a way that satisfies empirical researchers. Historically, Jung's alleged association with Nazism and his statements regarding Jewish psychology have drawn severe condemnation. While later scholarship has sought to contextualize these statements and largely exonerate Jung from being a Nazi sympathizer, this controversy has understandably cast a long shadow over his legacy. These accusations highlighted the potential for the misapplication of archetypal thinking and the dangers of essentializing groups of people. Despite these criticisms, it is important to acknowledge that Jung's work often operates outside the traditional positivist scientific paradigm, embracing a more hermeneutic, phenomenological, and qualitative approach to understanding the human psyche. His defenders argue that some aspects of the psyche, particularly its symbolic and spiritual dimensions, cannot be adequately captured by purely quantitative or reductive scientific methods. They emphasize the profound clinical utility and personal resonance that many individuals find in Jungian concepts and the depth of meaning these ideas provide in understanding human experience, irrespective of strict empirical proof. Jung's enduring influence, despite the critiques, speaks to the power and resonance of his insights into the human condition. The modern relevance of Carl Jung's philosophy continues to grow, particularly in a contemporary world grappling with issues of identity, meaning, and connection amidst rapid technological advancement and societal fragmentation. His concepts offer powerful lenses through which to understand current psychological and cultural phenomena, proving that his insights transcend the confines of early 20th century psychology. In an era often marked by existential angst and a search for purpose, Jung's emphasis on individuation and the pursuit of meaning resonates deeply. As traditional religious and societal structures weaken, many individuals feel adrift, seeking personal narratives and a sense of belonging. Jungian psychology provides a framework for this inner journey, guiding individuals to connect with their authentic selves and discover their unique purpose, not through external validation, but through a profound engagement with their inner world. This focus on wholeness, rather than merely curing symptoms, offers a compelling alternative to purely reductionist or medicalized approaches to mental health. The ubiquity of mental health challenges like anxiety, depression, and burnout can often be viewed through a Jungian lens as a call from the unconscious, urging individuals to reevaluate their conscious attitudes, integrate neglected aspects of their psyche, and find greater alignment with their authentic self. Moreover, Jung's archetypes remain incredibly relevant for understanding global narratives and collective behaviors. In an age dominated by media and digital culture, archetypal patterns are constantly being invoked in advertising, political rhetoric, and entertainment. From superhero movies embodying the hero archetype to political figures tapping into collective fears, shadow projections, or aspirations. Self-archetype. These ancient patterns continue to shape our collective imagination and influence societal trends. Understanding these underlying archetypal dynamics provides a critical tool for discerning propaganda, analyzing cultural products, and navigating the complexities of human interaction on a grand scale. The current emphasis on diversity, inclusion, and the integration of different perspectives finds a profound parallel in Jung's concept of integrating the shadow and the anima animus. Recognizing and accepting the other within ourselves, the disowned or repressed aspects, can foster greater empathy and understanding for those who are different from us in the external world. Projecting our personal and collective shadows onto minority groups or opposing political factions fuels prejudice and conflict. Jungian thought encourages a radical self-reflection as a prerequisite for genuine social harmony. Furthermore, Jung's concept of synchronicity offers a compelling perspective on the interconnectedness of life, a theme that resonates strongly in a world increasingly aware of global interconnectedness and the limits of purely mechanistic thinking. As quantum physics suggests a universe far more complex than classical materialism, Jung's a causal connecting principle provides a psychological framework for understanding the meaningful patterns and coincidences that defy purely causal explanation. This can foster a sense of wonder and deepen one's appreciation for the mysterious dimensions of existence. Finally, in the digital age, where personal identity can feel fragmented across multiple online personas, Jung's concept of the persona provides a crucial framework for self-awareness. Recognizing the different masks we wear and the potential for losing touch with our true self behind them becomes paramount. Analytical psychology encourages individuals to consciously differentiate between their authentic self and their digital personas, promoting psychological integrity in an increasingly virtual world. In essence, Jung's philosophy, far from being an archaic relic, offers a rich and dynamic set of tools for navigating the profound psychological and spiritual challenges of contemporary life. His enduring legacy lies in providing a holistic, depth-oriented understanding of human nature that continues to inspire and guide individuals on their journey towards wholeness and meaning. A deeper dive into the concept of the shadow archetype reveals its multifaceted nature and critical role in Jungian thought. The shadow is not merely the sum of our bad or undesirable traits. It is a complex and paradoxical aspect of the unconscious that encompasses everything the conscious ego has rejected, disowned, or simply not yet integrated. This includes not only personal flaws, weaknesses, and socially unacceptable impulses like selfishness, anger, or greed, but also undeveloped positive qualities, latent talents, and creative potential that have been suppressed. For instance, a person who consciously identifies as always being kind and agreeable might have an unacknowledged shadow of assertiveness or healthy anger. Similarly, a highly intellectual individual might have a suppressed shadow of deep emotionality or artistic flair. The ego, in its pursuit of a coherent and socially acceptable identity, persona, often pushes these shadow elements into the personal unconscious. The shadow can manifest in various ways. When it remains largely unconscious, it often gets projected onto other people or groups, leading to prejudice, scapegoating, and conflict. We tend to see in others what we refuse to see in ourselves. For example, a person who constantly criticizes others for being lazy might be projecting their own unacknowledged laziness or fear of failure. Politically, the collective shadow of a society can be projected onto opposing nations or minority groups, leading to dehumanization and violence. Alternatively, the unacknowledged shadow can manifest as self-sabotaging behaviors, irrational fears, sudden emotional outbursts, or chronic self-criticism. It can also appear in dreams as dark, menacing figures, or as overlooked, seemingly insignificant details that carry a heavy emotional charge. Confronting and integrating the shadow is a challenging but essential part of the individuation process. It requires a radical act of self-honesty, a willingness to look squarely at one's perceived imperfections and to acknowledge them as part of oneself. This is not about becoming bad or acting out destructive impulses, but rather about bringing these contents into conscious awareness, understanding their origins, and transforming their energy. The aim is to reclaim the energy bound up in these suppressed aspects, making it available for conscious use. For example, acknowledging one's shadow of anger doesn't mean becoming an angry person, but learning to harness that energy for healthy assertiveness or to defend important values. The integration process often begins with recognizing the projections of the shadow onto others. When we feel an intense dislike or fascination with a particular quality in someone else, it can often be a signal that we are encountering a projected aspect of our own shadow. By withdrawing these projections, we take responsibility for our own inner contents and begin the work of assimilation. This journey involves embracing paradox, accepting that one can be both good and bad, strong and weak, creative and destructive. It leads to a richer, more nuanced, and less rigid sense of self. A successfully integrated shadow doesn't disappear. It becomes a conscious partner in the psyche, adding depth, vitality, and a realistic understanding of human nature. It allows for greater empathy towards others, as one recognizes the universal struggle with imperfection. It also frees up immense psychic energy that was previously used to repress and deny these aspects, making it available for genuine creativity and personal growth. The wisdom gained from facing one's shadow ultimately strengthens the ego, making it more resilient and capable of holding the complexities of the human condition without fragmentation. The concept of the self in Jungian psychology is perhaps the most profound and encompassing archetype, representing the ultimate goal and regulating center of the entire psyche. It is distinct from the ego, which is merely the center of conscious awareness, a small part of the total personality. The self, by contrast, embraces both conscious and unconscious aspects, uniting them into a coherent and integrated whole. It is the archetype of wholeness, totality, and the innate drive towards individuation, guiding the individual towards their unique destiny and full potential. Jung often referred to the self as the God image within the psyche, not in a dogmatic religious sense, but as the central organizing principle that provides meaning and direction to life. It is the inherent blueprint for an individual's complete personality, a potential that is present from birth and strives for actualization throughout life. While the ego is focused on external adaptation and maintaining a conscious identity, the self operates on a deeper transpersonal level, orchestrating the process of psychological growth and balance. Symbols of the self are universal and appear across cultures and throughout history. Mandalas, circular designs with a central point, are perhaps the most iconic self symbols, representing psychic totality, order, and the reconciliation of opposites. Other common symbols include the circle, the sphere, the cross, the star, the wise old man or woman, the child, and various divine figures. These symbols emerge spontaneously in dreams, active imagination, and religious art, signifying a movement towards psychic integration and a connection to a deeper source of meaning. The relationship between the ego and the self is a dynamic and evolving one. In the first half of life, the ego is typically dominant, focused on establishing its identity, navigating the external world, and achieving personal goals. However, as individuation progresses, particularly in the second half of life, the ego must learn to humble itself and acknowledge its subservience to the larger wisdom of the self. This is not about the ego dissolving, but about it becoming aware of its place within the broader psychic totality, transforming from the soul center of the personality to a satellite of the self. When an individual achieves a greater connection to the self, they experience a profound sense of meaning, purpose, and inner peace. Life feels more coherent and purposeful, even amidst challenges. This connection can provide a sense of rootedness and resilience, enabling the individual to navigate the complexities of life with greater wisdom and authenticity. It's a feeling of being aligned with one's true nature and a larger cosmic order. The self also plays a crucial compensatory role. If the conscious attitude ego becomes too one-sided or rigid, the self will often send corrective messages through dreams, symptoms, or synchronistic events, urging the individual towards greater balance and integration. For instance, an overly rational individual might experience dreams with intense emotional content, pushing them to acknowledge their neglected feeling function. The journey to connect with the self is the core of individuation. It involves a continuous dialogue between the conscious ego and the unconscious, integrating the shadow, balancing the anima animus, and bringing awareness to other archetypal influences. It is a process of confronting and reconciling the inherent paradoxes of human existence: good and evil, light and dark, masculine and feminine, spirit and matter. The ultimate realization of the self is not a final destination of perfection, but a continuous unfolding, a deepening awareness of the totality of one's being and one's place within the collective human experience. It is the realization of one's unique potential and the living out of one's deepest meaning, guided by the central wisdom of the psyche itself. Jung's insights into the role of myth and symbolism extend beyond mere anthropological interest. They form a foundational pillar for understanding the very fabric of the human psyche and its developmental trajectory. For Jung, myths are not simply archaic stories or primitive attempts to explain the world. They are living manifestations of the collective unconscious, embodying archetypal patterns that resonate deeply with the human spirit. They provide a language for experiences that transcend individual consciousness and offer a framework for making sense of profound psychological and spiritual truths. Every culture, regardless of its level of technological advancement, possesses a rich tapestry of myths, legends, and folk tales. Jung observed that similar motifs, characters, and narrative structures appear repeatedly across these diverse traditions, even in cultures that had no historical contact. The hero's journey, the battle with a monster, the search for a lost treasure, the sacrifice and rebirth, the divine child, the wise old sage, these are not accidental commonalities. For Jung, they are expressions of inherited patterns of thought and feeling, blueprints of the human experience stored in the collective unconscious. These mythical narratives serve several crucial psychological functions. Firstly, they provide models for human behavior and development. By identifying with the hero, the trickster, or the wise old woman, individuals can gain insight into their own inner struggles and potential. Myths offer blueprints for rites of passage, guiding individuals through transitions like adolescence, marriage, or parenthood, and providing meaning for life's challenges and triumphs. Secondly, myths help individuals and communities cope with the unexplainable and the numinous. They give form to existential anxieties about death, suffering, and the unknown, transforming chaotic experiences into meaningful narratives. Religious myths, in particular, provide frameworks for understanding humanity's place in the cosmos, offering a sense of transcendence and connection to something larger than the individual ego. They tap into the inherent human need for meaning and spiritual fulfillment. Thirdly, myths act as compensatory mechanisms for the conscious attitude of a culture or an individual. If a society becomes too rational, scientific, or materialistic, its myths might emphasize themes of irrationality, spirituality, or the natural world, striving to restore balance to the collective psyche. Similarly, an individual's dreams may draw on mythical imagery to compensate for a one-sided conscious life. The symbols within myths are not arbitrary. They are living symbols that carry profound psychological energy and meaning. Unlike signs, which merely point to something else, symbols participate in the reality they represent, evoking deep emotional and cognitive responses. A mythological image of a serpent, for instance, can symbolize transformation, healing, death, or wisdom, depending on the context and the individual's psychological state. The power of myth lies in its ability to speak directly to the unconscious, bypassing the rational mind and stirring deep emotional and instinctual responses. For Jung, engaging with myth and symbolism was not an academic exercise, but a vital therapeutic tool. By exploring the myths that resonate with a client's personal experiences or dreams, the analyst can help the individual to contextualize their struggles within a larger human drama, reducing feelings of isolation and providing a sense of universal significance. It helps to transform personal suffering into meaningful experience, revealing the archetypal patterns at play. In a world increasingly dominated by scientific rationality and desacralized narratives, Jung argued for the enduring necessity of myth. He believed that modern individuals often suffer from a loss of soul due to their disconnection from these primordial stories and symbols. Re-engaging with the mythical dimension of life, whether through personal dream work, art, or cross-cultural storytelling, is essential for psychological health and the individuation process. It provides a source of collective wisdom, reconnects us to our shared humanity, and helps us navigate the complexities of life with greater meaning and purpose. The development of Jung's analytical psychology was fundamentally shaped by his complex relationship and eventual break with Sigmund Freud. Initially, Jung was seen as Freud's intellectual heir, his chosen successor to lead the nascent psychoanalytic movement. Freud was deeply impressed by Jung's work and saw in him the genius needed to carry the torch of psychoanalysis. For several years, they maintained an intense intellectual and personal bond, characterized by lengthy correspondences and discussions. However, fundamental theoretical divergences gradually emerged, ultimately leading to an irreparable rift. The primary point of contention was Jung's broadening of the concept of the unconscious. Freud insisted on the primacy of the personal unconscious, driven largely by repressed sexual and aggressive instincts, particularly the libido. While Jung acknowledged the personal unconscious, he challenged Freud's pansexualism, arguing that psychic energy libido was a broader, undifferentiated life force that manifested in various drives, not solely sexual ones. More importantly, Jung introduced the revolutionary concept of the collective unconscious, a deeper, transpersonal layer of the psyche containing inherited archetypes. Freud found this idea too mystical, unscientific, and a deviation from his empirically grounded, as he saw it, psychology. He viewed Jung's focus on mythology, religion, and universal symbols as a departure into esoteric speculation, which he believed would undermine the scientific credibility of psychoanalysis. Another significant disagreement concerned the nature of neurosis and its treatment. Freud typically traced neuroses back to repressed childhood traumas and unresolved psychosexual conflicts. The goal of therapy was to uncover and resolve these past conflicts. Jung, while acknowledging the past, introduced a teleological perspective, arguing that neuroses were also forward-looking attempts by the psyche to achieve greater wholeness. He saw symptoms as meaningful signals guiding the individual towards future growth and individuation, not just as products of past causation. This meant that Jungian therapy was less focused on uncovering infantile sexuality and more on integrating conscious and unconscious elements for future development. Jung's emphasis on spirituality and the human need for meaning also clashed with Freud's more secular and often reductionist view of religion as an illusion or a collective neurosis. Jung saw religious symbols and experiences as vital expressions of archetypal dynamics and essential for psychological well-being, whereas Freud viewed them largely as wish fulfillment or projections of infantile dependency. The personal dynamics between the two men also played a crucial role. Freud, as the elder and established patriarch, expected loyalty and adherence to his core doctrines. Jung, an independent and original thinker, increasingly felt constrained by Freud's dogmatism and his attempts to control the intellectual direction of the movement. Their relationship became marked by intellectual clashes and personal tensions, culminating in their final break in 1913. This break was a deeply painful but ultimately liberating experience for Jung. It forced him into a period of intense inner exploration, which he later called his confrontation with the unconscious. During this period, he engaged in active imagination, recorded his dreams, visions, and fantasies in what would become known as the Red Book. This profound and often disorienting inner journey was the crucible out of which analytical psychology, with its core concepts of the collective unconscious, archetypes, and individuation, was born. Had Jung not broken from Freud, his unique contributions might never have fully blossomed. The split allowed him to develop his own comprehensive system for understanding the psyche, one that embraced the symbolic, spiritual, and teleological dimensions of human experience, carving out a distinct and enduring legacy that continues to profoundly influence contemporary thought. The divergent paths of Freud and Jung illustrate a fundamental difference in their views of human nature and the purpose of psychological inquiry, leaving two distinct yet equally influential schools of thought in depth psychology. Jung's engagement with Eastern philosophies and mystical traditions was not merely an academic interest, but a profound source of insight and corroboration for his own psychological theories. He found striking parallels between the archetypal patterns he observed in the collective unconscious of his Western patients and the wisdom traditions of the East, particularly from India Hinduism, Buddhism, and China Taoism, I Ching. This comparative approach reinforced his conviction in the universality of certain psychic structures and processes, suggesting that humanity's spiritual and psychological journey follows similar patterns regardless of cultural context. One of the most significant influences came from Taoism, particularly the concept of yin and yang. Jung saw the yin-yang symbol as a perfect representation of his principle of the union of opposites and the central dynamics of the individuation process. The interplay of light and dark, masculine and feminine, conscious and unconscious, activity and passivity, perfectly mirrored his understanding of the psyche's drive towards balance and integration. The Taoist emphasis on finding harmony within these polarities, rather than suppressing one in favor of the other, directly informed his approach to reconciling psychic contradictions. The I Ching, or Book of Changes, an ancient Chinese divination text, deeply fascinated Jung. He wrote a famous foreword to its English translation, highlighting its psychological significance. He viewed the I Ching not as a tool for predicting the future in a literal sense, but as a method for exploring the patterns of the unconscious and understanding the current psychological situation. He applied his theory of synchronicity to the I Ching, seeing the random throwing of coins or yarrow stalks as a causally connected to the inner state of the questioner, thus revealing meaningful insights from the unconscious. For Jung, the I Ching was a profound philosophical text that articulated the interconnectedness of psyche and cosmos, offering archetypal wisdom for navigating life's complexities. Hinduism and Buddhism also held immense significance for Jung. He was particularly drawn to the concept of the self in Hinduism, Atman, and the notion of enlightenment or awakening in Buddhism. He saw these as analogous to his concept of individuation, the process of realizing the complete and unified self. The practice of meditation and yoga, aimed at transcending the ego and experiencing higher states of consciousness, resonated with his therapeutic goal of helping individuals connect with their deeper spiritual dimensions. He recognized the rich symbolism of deities and mythical figures in these traditions as archetypal manifestations, providing a path for psychological integration and spiritual growth. For example, the Hindu goddess Kali, with her dual aspects of creation and destruction, could be seen as an archetypal representation of the powerful, paradoxical aspects of the Great Mother or Shadow. Jung's interest in Eastern thought was not about converting to these religions, but about extracting their psychological truths and integrating them into his understanding of the Western psyche. He believed that the East had maintained a closer connection to the unconscious and its spiritual dimensions, while the West, with its emphasis on rationality and scientific materialism, had often neglected these vital aspects. He argued that Western individuals in their search for meaning could benefit from the psychological insights embedded in Eastern traditions, not by uncritically adopting them, but by using them to understand and address the specific imbalances of the Western mind. His comparative study of these traditions allowed him to articulate the universal patterns of human spiritual experience, transcending cultural specificities and pointing towards a common psychic heritage. This cross-cultural dialogue cemented his belief in the collective unconscious as a universal human phenomenon and provided him with a vast repository of symbolic material to enrich his theories of archetypes and the journey of individuation. The critique of Jung's perceived lack of scientific rigor is a significant and persistent challenge to his legacy, contrasting sharply with the dominant paradigm of empirical science that emerged in the 20th century. Mainstream psychology, particularly in academic and research-oriented institutions, largely operates under a positivist framework, demanding measurable data, controlled experiments, and replicable results. From this perspective, Jung's key concepts often appear elusive and unprovable. The collective unconscious, for example, is described as an inherited, universal psychic substratum. How can one isolate and test such a construct? Its very nature defies direct observation or quantification. Critics argue that attributing similarities across cultures to an inherited collective unconscious is an assumption that lacks empirical support. Alternative explanations, such as common human biological structures leading to similar cognitive processes, cultural diffusion, or shared environmental challenges, are often favored as more parsimonious and testable hypotheses. Similarly, archetypes, as forms without content or psychic organs, are difficult to operationalize for scientific study. While their manifestations in symbols and myths can be observed, the underlying archetypal pattern itself remains a theoretical construct. Measuring the influence of an archetype on an individual is problematic, as it relies heavily on subjective interpretation and lacks objective indicators. This leads to concerns about falsifiability. If a theory cannot be proven false through empirical evidence, it is considered unscientific. Jungian concepts, critics contend, are often so broad and encompassing that they can explain almost anything, making them resistant to disproof. Jung's methodology, particularly his extensive use of clinical case studies, dream analysis, and active imagination, is also scrutinized. While these methods provide rich, qualitative data and deep insights into individual psyches, they are typically considered less rigorous than quantitative research methods. The interpretation of symbols is inherently subjective, raising questions about inter-rater reliability and the potential for analyst bias. There is no universally agreed upon Jungian dictionary for dream symbols, and the process often involves a dialectical engagement between analyst and analysand, making it difficult to standardize or replicate. Furthermore, Jung's integration of ideas from alchemy, astrology, and comparative religion, while enriching his philosophical framework, is often seen as blurring the lines between psychology and metaphysics, or esotericism. For many empirically minded scientists, this move away from conventional scientific discourse further undermines the scientific legitimacy of his work, placing it more in the realm of philosophy or spirituality than empirical science. In response to these criticisms, proponents of Jungian psychology often argue that the human psyche, especially its unconscious and symbolic dimensions, cannot be fully understood or measured by purely quantitative scientific methods. They contend that a different epistemology is required, one that embraces hermeneutics, phenomenology, and qualitative approaches. Jung himself viewed the psyche as a complex, dynamic system that defies simple reductionism. He believed that the value of his concepts lay not in their statistical probability, but in their capacity to provide meaning, coherence, and guidance for individuals on their journey of psychological transformation. The proof of Jungian concepts for many comes from their subjective experience in therapy, the profound insights they offer into dreams and life patterns, and their ability to facilitate personal growth and individuation. While efforts have been made to develop more empirical research methodologies within Jungian studies, such as the use of quantitative content analysis in dream research or studies on the efficacy of Jungian therapy, the fundamental tension between Jung's depth psychological approach and mainstream empirical science persists. This ongoing debate highlights a broader philosophical divide about what constitutes valid knowledge in the study of human experience, particularly concerning the deeper, less tangible aspects of the psyche. One of the most complex and critically examined aspects of Jung's philosophy is its relationship with spirituality and religion. Unlike Freud, who often viewed religious belief as an illusion or a collective neurosis rooted in infantile dependency, Jung saw religion as a fundamental innate human function arising directly from the collective unconscious. He believed that the human psyche possesses an inherent religious function, an innate drive to find meaning, connection, and transcendence, to engage with something larger than the individual ego. For Jung, religious symbols, myths, and rituals are not simply cultural artifacts or historical curiosities. They are profound expressions of archetypal patterns that emerge from the deepest layers of the psyche. The image of God, regardless of its specific cultural manifestation, whether Yahweh, Christ, Allah, or various deities, was interpreted as an archetype of the self, the totality and unifying center of the psyche. This meant that the experience of the divine, or the numinous, was a psychological reality, a direct encounter with an archetypal force within the human spirit. Jung differentiated between religion as a codified system of beliefs and practices and religiosity as a personal, subjective experience of the numinous. While he respected established religions for providing structures and containers for these powerful archetypal energies, he was ultimately concerned with the individual's direct experience and relationship to the transcendent. He argued that the decline of traditional religious frameworks in the West, coupled with a dominant scientific materialism, had left many individuals spiritually impoverished. This disconnection from the archetypal dimension, he believed, often contributed to neuroses, existential angst, and a sense of meaninglessness in modern life. Without a framework to contain and integrate these powerful unconscious forces, individuals could become overwhelmed or project their spiritual needs onto secular ideologies or addictive behaviors. Jung's approach to religion was psychological, not theological. He was not interested in proving or disproving the existence of God in a metaphysical sense. Instead, he focused on the psychological reality and efficacy of religious experience. He believed that religious belief systems offered symbolic language and ritual practices that could help individuals engage with and integrate the contents of the unconscious, fostering a sense of purpose and wholeness. For him, the question of God's existence was beyond the scope of psychology. What mattered was the archetype of God and its profound impact on the human psyche. This perspective has naturally drawn both praise and criticism. Religious adherents sometimes criticized Jung for psychologizing God, effectively reducing the divine to an intrapsychic phenomenon. They argued that he stripped religion of its transcendent truth by interpreting its symbols as mere projections of the human mind. Conversely, secular or scientific critics often found Jung's embrace of spirituality and his emphasis on the religious function to be a departure from scientific psychology, aligning him too closely with mysticism or esoteric thought. Despite these criticisms, Jung's work has provided a rich framework for dialogue between psychology and theology, offering a bridge between the inner world of human experience and the outer world of spiritual traditions. His insights have allowed individuals to explore their spiritual journeys from a psychological perspective, finding meaning in symbols and rituals that might otherwise seem archaic or dogmatic. He underscored the vital importance of the spiritual dimension for psychological well-being, arguing that true individuation necessarily involves a conscious relationship with one's deeper self and the transcendent forces that shape human existence. This holistic view remains profoundly relevant in a world searching for deeper meaning beyond material pursuits. Central to Jung's understanding of the psyche is the concept of psychic energy, which he termed libido, but significantly differentiated from Freud's exclusively sexual interpretation. For Jung, libido was a broader, undifferentiated life energy, a general psychic force that fuels all mental processes and activities. It is the driving force behind our thoughts, emotions, desires, motivations, and spiritual aspirations. This psychic energy is dynamic and constantly flowing, seeking pathways for expression and fulfillment within the individual. Jung conceived of psychic energy as operating according to principles analogous to those found in physics, particularly the principles of equivalence and entropy. The principle of equivalence states that psychic energy is never lost, but merely transformed. If energy is withdrawn from one psychic activity or complex, it will inevitably reappear in another. For instance, if an individual represses a strong emotion or desire, the energy associated with it doesn't vanish. It might manifest in a symptom, a dream, a creative urge, or a neurotic behavior. This principle underpins the idea of compensation, where the unconscious attempts to balance conscious attitudes by investing energy in neglected or opposite psychic contents. The principle of entropy, borrowed from thermodynamics, suggests that psychic energy tends towards equilibrium. Over time, there is a natural tendency for the differences in intensity between various psychic components to equalize, leading to a more balanced and integrated state of the psyche. This drive towards equilibrium is fundamental to the process of individuation, as it implies a movement towards the reconciliation of opposites, conscious-unconscious, masculine-feminine, good-bad, and the creation of a more unified self. When the psyche is in a state of disharmony or one-sidedness, psychic energy becomes concentrated in certain complexes or conscious attitudes, creating tension. The drive towards entropy aims to release this tension by redistributing energy, fostering greater balance. Psychic energy can be directed either externally or internally, corresponding to Jung's attitudes of extroversion and introversion. An extrovert individual typically directs their psychic energy outwards, towards objects, people, and external activities, drawing their vitality from external stimulation. An introverted individual directs their psychic energy inwards towards their inner world of thoughts, feelings, and reflections, drawing vitality from internal processes. Both directions are essential for a healthy psyche, and psychological development often involves learning to consciously regulate the flow of energy between these two poles. Furthermore, psychic energy is invested in complexes. A complex, being an emotionally charged group of ideas, images, and memories, acts like a magnet, drawing psychic energy to itself. The more energy a complex possesses, the more powerfully it can influence conscious thought and behavior, sometimes even manifesting as an autonomous splinter personality. For example, a power complex might absorb a significant amount of psychic energy, compelling an individual to constantly seek control and dominance. The goal of analytical therapy is to understand where psychic energy is being blocked, fixated, or misdirected, and to help the individual liberate and consciously redirect this energy towards healthier, more individuated pursuits. By bringing unconscious contents like complexes or shadow aspects into conscious awareness, the ego can gain greater control over the psychic energy previously autonomously held by these elements. This energy can then be reinvested in personal growth, creative endeavors, or the development of neglected psychological functions. Jung also linked psychic energy to the concept of values. What we value, what we are drawn to, and what we dedicate our lives to are all expressions of where our psychic energy is invested. A shift in values often signifies a redirection of libido, a change in the central organizing principle of the psyche. Ultimately, Jung's understanding of psychic energy provides a dynamic framework for comprehending the movement and transformation within the human mind. It underscores the active, self-regulating nature of the psyche, constantly striving for balance, meaning, and the realization of its fullest potential through the process of individuation. The concept of the inferior function in Jungian typology is crucial for understanding psychological development, particularly the lifelong process of individuation. Jung proposed 4 fundamental psychological functions: thinking, feeling rational functions, sensation, and intuition irrational functions. While each individual has access to all 4 functions, they typically develop one as their dominant or superior function, which is highly conscious, differentiated, and well controlled by the ego. The dominant function is the primary mode through which an individual perceives and interacts with the world. Corresponding to the dominant function, there is an opposing inferior function. This inferior function is the least conscious, most primitive, undifferentiated, and often troublesome aspect of the personality. It operates largely outside of ego control, often manifesting in unexpected, unskillful, or even disruptive ways. For example, if thinking is an individual's dominant function, making them logical, analytical, and objective, then feeling would be their inferior function. Such a person might struggle to understand or express emotions, make decisions based on personal values, or connect authentically with others on an emotional level. Their feelings might erupt unexpectedly, be childish or inappropriate, or manifest as a vague sense of unease. Similarly, if sensation is dominant, making someone practical, grounded, and attentive to concrete details, intuition would be inferior. This person might find it difficult to grasp abstract concepts, see future possibilities, or trust their gut feelings. Their intuitive insights might be fleeting, unreliable, or expressed in confusing ways. The inferior function is often associated with the shadow, as it contains aspects of the personality that the ego has repressed or neglected in favor of its dominant mode. It is the Achilles heel of the personality, a source of vulnerability and potential embarrassment. However, for Jung, the inferior function is not merely a weakness to be overcome. It is a vital gateway to the unconscious and a key to achieving psychological wholeness. The process of individuation requires the integration of the inferior function into conscious awareness. This is a challenging but profoundly enriching task, especially in the second half of life, when the psyche naturally pushes for greater balance. The ego must acknowledge its limitations and gradually learn to engage with this undeveloped aspect of itself. This can involve consciously practicing activities that draw upon the inferior function, paying attention to dreams that highlight its themes, or recognizing its manifestations in interpersonal relationships often projected onto others. For instance, the extroverted thinking type might benefit from spending quiet time in nature, journaling about their feelings, or engaging in artistic expression to develop their introverted feeling. The introverted intuitive might need to intentionally focus on practical details, engage in hands-on activities, or pay more attention to their physical sensations to bring their extroverted sensation into greater awareness. When the inferior function is successfully integrated, it doesn't become dominant, nor does it become as refined as the superior function. Rather, it becomes a more conscious and available resource, adding depth and balance to the personality. Flexibility and range, moving beyond a one-sided approach to life. It fosters empathy for those who operate primarily with that function and reduces the tendency to project one's own unconscious weaknesses onto others. Ultimately, developing the inferior function brings the individual Manarain. The individual gains a more rounded perspective, improved adaptability, and access to previously untapped sources of wisdom and creativity. The formerly problematic energy associated with the inferior function is transformed into a valuable asset. The integration of the inferior function allows the individual to operate with greater closer to the self, facilitating the reconciliation of opposites and the realization of a more complete and integrated personality capable of embracing the full spectrum of human experience. Jung's concept of active imagination stands as one of his most distinctive and therapeutically powerful techniques, offering a direct path to engage with the contents of the unconscious. Unlike passive reverie or simple daydreaming, active imagination is a conscious, intentional process of engaging with spontaneous images, figures, and narratives that emerge from the unconscious mind. It requires a focused effort and a willingness to enter into a dialogue with these inner phenomena as if they were real. The goal is not to control the unconscious, but to allow it to express itself and to enter into a relationship with its contents. The process typically begins by consciously focusing on an image, a feeling, a dream fragment, or a strong emotional state. The individual then allows this initial spark to unfold spontaneously, observing what emerges without judgment or censorship. Instead of merely watching, the person actively participates in the emerging scene, asking questions of the inner figures, responding to their actions, and allowing the dialogue or narrative to develop organically. This engagement can take various forms. It might involve writing a dialogue, drawing, painting, sculpting, or simply having an internal conversation. The key is to give concrete form and expression to the fleeting, often elusive contents of the unconscious. For example, if a dream presented a menacing shadow figure, active imagination would involve engaging with that figure, asking it what it wants, why it is menacing, or what message it carries. The purpose of active imagination is multifaceted. Firstly, it facilitates the integration of unconscious contents into conscious awareness. By giving voice and form to complexes, archetypes, and repressed emotions, these elements lose some of their autonomous, disruptive power. The ego gains a better understanding of their nature and can begin the process of assimilation. Secondly, active imagination helps to differentiate between the ego and the unconscious. Through this dialogue, the individual learns that they are not identical with the contents of their unconscious. Rather, they are the conscious ego interacting with these inner figures. This distinction is crucial for developing psychological resilience and preventing the ego from being overwhelmed by unconscious forces. Thirdly, active imagination can provide profound insights and guidance for life challenges. The unconscious, especially in its archetypal layers, often holds a wisdom that surpasses the ego's limited perspective. By engaging with this wisdom through inner figures, individuals can find creative solutions, gain new perspectives on problems, and receive direction on their path of individuation. It can be a powerful source of personal meaning and spiritual insight. Fourthly, it helps in the transcendent function, a concept Jung described as the bridge between conscious and unconscious. Active imagination creates new symbolic forms that mediate between these two realms, leading to a new, synthesized understanding that transcends the previous opposition. This new understanding represents a step forward in psychological development. While active imagination can be a highly transformative practice, it also requires a certain psychological stability and is often best undertaken with the guidance of a trained Jungian analyst, especially in the initial stages. The unconscious can be a powerful and sometimes overwhelming realm, and the analyst can help the individual navigate difficult or disturbing material, distinguish between genuine insights and mere fantasies, and integrate the experience safely and productively. The ultimate aim is to empower the individual to cultivate an ongoing, healthy relationship with their unconscious, drawing on its vast resources for growth, creativity, and self-realization, long after formal therapy has concluded. It is a tool for lifelong self-discovery and a practical application of Jung's philosophy of individuation. If you're still listening, you can subscribe for more such videos. Thanks for watching.